Okay, let's call to order the Planning Committee meeting for Wednesday, November 5th. We're all here except Karen, and let's open a public comment. Any member of the public, you are invited to address the committee. Seeing nobody jump up there, we're open. Last chance. We're closed. Approval of the minutes. Are there any? Okay, motion from Abelson, second from Durant. I'm sorry, Romick. All those in favor? All but Mitchoff. She's not here. Consent calendar items, generally routine. Anybody want to pull number one, or do you want to move on it?
Move approval on all of them.
I'll second it. Okay, we have a motion, Romick, second Durant. Seeing no one object, that carries 4-0. Let's get into the real good stuff. Item 2.
We didn't vote.
No, I said we're all good except Mitchoff's not here. We don't need to vote. I just voted for you. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, next item is item 2, approval to release request for proposal 14-3 to retain on-call transportation performance monitoring consultant, Matt Kelly.
I believe that's on the consent calendar.
That'll teach me. I thought it was just one item. This is what happens when you put them on different pages. Okay. Oh, all right, pick on a chair. Okay, Brad, you're up. Brad Beck is doing number 3, approval of resolution 1450-G and 1451-G, and we'll let him explain it.
Thank you, Chair. City of Richmond has 2 projects that were programmed in the programming plan for programs 12 and 13, the TLC and pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facilities programs. They are both related. They're related to each other. They're parts of the Richmond Transit Village Eastside Improvement Project. One of them is to improve the entrance to the BART station. It goes from the BART entrance to Nevin, 19th on Nevin Street. It would be an extension of the street. And the other one would go from that point east to 27th, which is right in front of the Richmond Civic Center. They have requested a appropriation of $2.43 million for the program 12-6, the Nevin to BART to 19th, and $588,000 for the project from 19th to 27th. On September 29th, we held a peer review on the 2 projects, and the review committee reviewed the 90% drawings, and those that the peer review committee recommended that the authority approve the peer review, and we're asking that you approve the resolution, those 2 resolutions to approve the funding appropriations for this project. And I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Questions of staff other than what the heck is a bicycle Cheryl?
I can answer that question.
Good.
Sharrow is a new marking on streets that is not, it's not an arrow, it's a Sharrow. It looks like a bicyclist with 2 chevrons on top of his head or her head. And it's meant to indicate that the drivers are meant to share the street with bicyclists. They're best used on lower volume and lower speed streets.
Any other questions before I get a motion from Durant? Okay, we're looking for resolution 1450G. 51. Go ahead, Janet.
Okay. I'm just curious because this project has been around or at least I feel like it's been around a long time. I was just curious if it's now going to be done.
Yes, it has been around for a while. There are 2 reasons why it's been delayed. The first reason is that it depended a lot on redevelopment funds, and with the loss of redevelopment, there was some loss of funds for the city, and they have taken some time to get those funding put back together. The other is that they are also getting federal funds for the project, and the city has had some issues getting approval through Caltrans during the local assistance process. But they assure us that they do have the funding, and we're at the 90%, and they're working towards having the full set of drawings and complete drawings soon.
So it'll go to construction how soon? Vaguely?
They think they want to do the majority of the construction in the next summer.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Making the motion?
Yes, so moved.
Okay.
Second.
Motion Abelson, second Romick. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposition, no abstentions. We're on to number 4. The report on the status of projects funded through Measure J Program 12. And Brad?
Thank you again. Let's see if the PowerPoint will work. The authority adopted the programming plan for those 2 programs that helped fund the previous projects, the projects subject to the previous item. 2.5 years ago, the plan programmed expected funds through the end of this fiscal year, that is through June 30th, 2013. And after that 2.5 years, we thought it would be a good idea to bring the status of those 2 programs to the authority for your review. The plan programmed $16 million to 28 TLC projects, and about $6 million to 14 PBTF projects. The majority of those projects, 33 out of the 42, are capital. That is, they're going to construct something, and the majority of, by far, the largest share of the funding is going to go to those capital projects. About 93%, or 20 million out of the 20, roughly 22 million. After 2.5 years, however, only 7 projects have been completed. 2 of the plans or studies and 5 of the capital projects. The majority of the projects, about 26, are either in the design or study phase or in the construction phase. And there are about 9 projects that have not yet begun. It's not quite as dire as it might seem at reading those numbers, because some of the projects didn't have their funding programmed until this year, so they didn't expect to go forward. Nonetheless, the average project is behind schedule. On average, compared to the schedule that the sponsors gave us when they applied for the funding, the average project is about 1.5 years behind what they said when they said they were going to complete the projects. Some of them are going to be more than 3 years behind schedule. And there are a lot of reasons why. I mentioned the problems that the Richmond project had with getting approval through Caltrans for their other funding, losing funding, staffing changes, loss of staffing, scope creep in some cases, unforeseen circumstances. There are 2 projects that haven't yet begun that are part of a bigger project, and now those are 2 projects that are related to the Hercules Intermodal Transit Center. And their completion and implementation is tied in with completion and implementation of the other components of that project. And that delay shows up in the amount of funding that's been programmed versus the amount that's been appropriated and the amount that's been invoiced. And you'll note that only about 12% of the funding has been invoiced so far. Though we do expect that to start, and we've seen this recently, that the invoices are starting to come in much more quickly as projects get going into their design and construction phases. The next chart shows that a bit. The blue line is the program, cumulative programmed funding, and the red line, or orange line, Martin doesn't like to have red lines on the graphs, but so we'll call it brown. And burnt sienna, maybe, if you remember your Crayola crayons.
Where did we go wrong? We were talking about a line? Now we're...
The bottom line, it shows the amount that's been appropriated, and the last segment of that line is shown in dotted because we're in that fiscal year, and we expect to get more appropriations. For example, next month, we expect to get an appropriation from the East Bay Regional Park District for their share of maintenance and improvement funds for trails within West County.
Getting some bucks.
So what's next? We talked to TCC about some of the ways that we could help speed along implementation, where the projects have funding through other sources. TCC members suggested the authority staff might help in getting meetings set up with Caltrans and helping ease that process a bit. They've also suggested that when we do the applications that we set up and ask for more realistic schedules. We did not ask that, we didn't judge the projects based on how quickly they could implement, but on their potential benefits. So if we could get better and more realistic schedules at the beginning, we'd perhaps do a better job at programming the funding. TCC members also suggested that we might want to look at readiness of the project and the project sponsor's ability to implement in a timely way as one of the factors that we use to judge which projects get funded. One thing that staff has thought about is that we delay the next call for projects so that we give sponsors a chance to implement their projects that they have going on now, and that we also might be able to tie this funding or coordinate this funding with the next OBAG call for projects, which we expect to happen in 2016. We're not sure how to do that. That would be a subject of discussion that we would bring back to the authority once we think out some of the ramifications of doing that.
Good.
Anyway, that's the end of my report, and I'd
Okay.
be glad to answer any questions.
And I would ask, if there are any questions, I'd ask you take the last sentence on page 2, I think is what you were talking about, the TCC comments. It's asking, receive the report, make recommendations to improve the project delivery, and kind of what I'm hearing, if I can, we got lights, is whether or not we do this readiness as a project ranking. Let's start with Dave and then come to the chair.
Sure. The real question I have about this is recognizing that project readiness is almost always in the eye of the beholder, and that oftentimes it takes longer for a sort of a project to evolve than one might want. Do we think that having this as a source of funds available and essentially committed is actually hampering people's sort of sense of urgency about getting projects done more fast or more quickly?
It is, one of the TCC members did mention that as a potential approach the authority might take, that if you don't use the money within a certain period of time, that it goes back into the pot for reallocation to other projects that might be more ready.
I'm not going quite that far.
That is one of the things that one TCC member did say.
Yeah. So to be blunt, I mean, my thought is, maybe after a certain period of time, you go back and you make the jurisdiction justify keeping the funds in the program allocated to them, as opposed to just saying build it by X date or withdrawn. It's tell us why we should still tie up our funds this way, because there may be other project, shovel-ready projects that are available. It may be nonsensical. Maybe there's a non-issue given the dollars we're talking about, but it was just a question.
Chair Olnick?
I can understand the delay in the projects, but the programs and studies, and so many of them being behind schedule and not done, I mean, it almost looks as if people threw out wish lists of here's what we'd like to do if we get the money. If they gave the money, and then they're scrambling to figure out, okay, what do we do with this money now that we have it? And it's taking them obviously way too long to use the money we're giving them.
Yeah.
So following up on David, maybe it's something else as part of our checklist. Is there has to be a certain level of preparedness they need to be at, and maybe not shovel-ready, but, or something similar to that, to say you're ready to use the money and you're going to use it now, as opposed to taking it, sitting on it, and thinking, how can I use it now that I have it? It looks like there's a lot of that kind of happening, and like you say, in project scope, okay, now we have the money, now we can do this, this, and this, where we hadn't prepared for it in the past. So maybe it's sort of a checklist and ask for more. Better prepared, and like I say, there weren't any really reasons given to why programs and studies were in such a delay as opposed to the project. Like I say, I understand the projects, but the studies, it's just, that should be, hey, give me the money and off we go with it. Was there any reasons given why studies and programs were so delayed?
Not, they weren't, I know some of the reasons that they weren't necessarily given to me. I know one of them is delayed well, most of them, all but one have begun, are in the process of being completed, and some of them are very close to being completed. The Walnut Creek pedestrian plan, for example, is about 3/4 of the way completed. I do know that one is delayed partly because there's the agency has another study that's going on that's taking quite a bit of effort and has a lot of public outreach involved in it. So I'm assuming that that's part of the reason is the same staff, and they just don't have time to get started on the next study.
And you don't want to duplicate, but that's for the money. I know that's what's happening with ours. The other thing, and I'm reading this, and because what we're asked to do is recommendations is appropriate to improve project delivery, and I think we just heard two. But the line above TCC comments, the requirements of Measure J as well, while the purposes of Measure J and OBAG programs overlap considerably, the requirements of Measure J as well as the still unknown requirements of the next OBAG program may make such coordination difficult. Coordinating them, however, could have positive impacts. I mean, I'm looking at that, you kind of covered every base right there. You're not looking for us, well, press on anyway or not wait for one Bay Area, are you? Or we might hear from one of our members.
Well, I think staff has been talking internally a bit about ways that we might coordinate them.
Okay.
There are a lot of reasons that why it would be difficult, but there are some things that where it could be beneficial, and the staff report mentions one of those where we could use the Measure J funds to provide the local match where a jurisdiction doesn't have the funds, or it might be a way to supplement the OBAG funds to fund a much larger project. The OBAG funding pot will be quite a bit bigger than the funding pot that we'll have available through Measure J through either or both of the programs.
What I read from that is you're not looking for us to make comments like I just did on this, but it does sound like something that probably is going to be coming back time and time and time again, and
Yes.
It might be of help to what the problem is. And the problem is, how do we do what was delivery is what I'm reading out of this, as appropriate to improve project delivery. Mr. Iwasaki?
Yeah, Commissioners, this really was an informational item to kind of show you and illustrate that deliverability is pretty critical on some of these funding programs like OBAG was. And so where staff suggested that a project may or may not be ready, we were told that, to do all these other things with OBAG money. So if this were federal money, some of these projects would lose the funding, and we'd have to move them off somewhere else and try to save the dollars. So it illustrates the fact that some of these projects aren't getting delivered on time. And so the other day when we were competing for ATP dollars, when I called Steve Heminger, I said, if you want to put your money to work faster, we're going to advertise this contract within a matter of months. We got an allocation because it's delivered. These dollars are just sitting there waiting for somebody to get a project ready to go, and it's taking a long time. So it's just the status on, is deliverability key to you as a board? I think so. I mean, you expect that out of us. And so how then do you incentivize when we allocate these dollars for a great project, because it was the project that did the most, these projects aren't still getting delivered, and so they're not benefiting anybody in Contra Costa County unless they get built. So it was really, and there are pitfalls and difficulties to delivering projects today. So when I say that a project is deliverable and it isn't deliverable on the schedule that I say it is, then there's a problem, right? And so we've got to figure out a way to incentivize delivery of these, because this is a lot of money. It's $21 million, and some of it's not going to work. And it really was just kind of an informational item, kind of giving you a status on those two key programs that were part of Measure J when it was passed by the voters, right?
Well, what I'm hearing is we accept the report. There are two comments that are being made. I don't know if, at least from two of the members right now, that they're ready to go all the way to project readiness is king, but it's important. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not unfair to say, look, when you apply for the funding and you give us a project delivery timeframe, and it's program equally so here, that if a year beyond the date when you said the project would be delivered or the program would be funded, you haven't delivered, we want to report, and we're going to reevaluate whether you retain the funding. And I don't think there's anything irrational about that, as long as it's, if you will, not stacked so heavily in the use it or lose it universe. But I do think there's a point at which, you know, the one that struck me is 47 months. It just seems like a hell of a long time to have money tied up, sitting there, not being put to good use, when, you know what, over a 4-year period, some other pot of money might be available and we could use those dollars for something else. So I think that's maybe an interim step we could take, and if that still doesn't do the trick, then maybe you go to the sort of the more, or the less surgical approach, the more heavy-handed approach.
I'm hearing that's the monitoring thing, and good approach, the one-year report. And before we move on to number 5, Mr. Iwasaki, you want to add one? Nope. We did a multiple nod here. We don't need a motion. It's a good report. We receive it. Let's move on to number 5, status report on the 2014 draft CTP update. And who has this? I have to go to the next page. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Commissioners. Just to give you a quick update on the 2014 draft CTP that was issued back in early August. We also issued a supplemental environmental impact statement on the countywide plan back in September. And the comment period for the plan was closed on November 3rd. So last Monday, we closed the comment period. And in your packet, we included 12 comment letters that were received before the mail out for the Planning Committee packet. And we received another 17 letters after that. So you have all the letters before you. There was a supplemental mailing called Attachment 5A, which has letters 1 through 12. And then as a handout tonight are the remaining letters. And these are letters that we receive from public agencies or non-governmental organizations. Now, in addition to these 29 letters, we have also received, I'll say, tens of emails, not quite 100, and hundreds of bright ideas through our KeepContraCostaMoving.net website. And those are all posted on our website, and the link to that is in the packet. So that's a big package there. We're not printing it for the time being. And our plan is to continue this through to the authority as an information item to show them essentially all of the comments that we received on the plan. And then in December, we will have had a chance to package them and organize them and begin to see if there are any changes that need to be made to either the countywide plan or the 5 action plans regarding these comments. We did start to see some themes as we comb through all the comments. And obviously, there's the tension between maintenance, maintaining what we have, and expanding our system. And we see that practically in all of the modes. There seems to be a lot of support for technology and squeezing more capacity out of the existing system, and technology kind of being the silver bullet that's going to help us use what we have. A lot of support for multimodal solutions. I was reading through the Bright Ideas, and just I think a lot of people that ride their bike wrote in that they want better bike trails, even comments about certain sections of trails that are bumpy and that they'd commute if it wasn't so bumpy. Many calls for improved bus service, and especially improvements to transit, and calls for transit connecting Central County, Walnut Creek down to Dublin. And then there's mention in a few of the letters about vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gases, and how that should be our core goal over the next 25 years with transportation. How do we reduce number of vehicle miles traveled, and how do we reduce the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted by our transportation system? And of course, we have another number of strategies in the plan for that, but we may want to revisit those and possibly strengthen some of those. So this is just kind of a quick snapshot of where we are. We'll come back in December, as I said, with kind of a package of comments sorted and organized, and we will begin to talk about revisions to the plan in that context. And then in January, we should have the revisions ready for you, and we're still shooting for adoption of the 2014 CTP in early 2015. And I'm gonna don't put all your money on February, but the hope is that we get this thing done and hammered down in February. Yeah, so that's where we are with the countywide plan. That concludes my report.
Okay, so the recommendation is to receive the report. Any comments, particularly on the Walnut Creek up to Dublin section? Okay, seeing none, we've received the report. Actually, it is uphill. Let's move on to number 6. This is Peter's big chance to do, and there's a supplemental here I bring to your attention for the recommendation, and this is the authorization for the Contra Costa Express bus study, which might be the reason why we're a little waiting for our money, but that's Peter.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee members. So the chair did mention that there's a revision to your item 6. The revision was done because the selection committee for the consultant, the selection committee did make a recommendation. That recommendation is Arup. Arup has some significant recent experience with express bus work here in the Bay Area, doing both the Solano County express bus study as well as the express bus element of the MTC's transportation sustainability study. I wanted to introduce Tony Brazzoni, who's in the audience. Tony is with Arup, and he would be the principal in charge of the study. So wanted to introduce him. You'll see him around as he and his team work on this. We're asking for is a recommendation to the authority to approve the selection of Arup, to authorize staff to negotiate, and the chair to execute a contract with Arup in the amount not to exceed $150,000, and to authorize a notice to proceed in the amount of $20,000. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I just wanted to notice that on the supplemental, the last line in the recommendation is missing. Should read to Chair of Planning Committee. You didn't read it. I knew it. To proceed to $20,000 to Chair of Planning Committee. Okay. Do I have a motion to do the staff's recommendation?
Move approval.
Second?
You got that? Romick 1, Abelson 2. All those in favor say aye. Seeing no no's or adjournments. Other business, do we have any? News clippings and correspondence. I got something from you in an email, Mr. Iwasaki, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it is. Yes, bond rating.
Bond rating, we got a bond rating of double A. What was that, Randy? Or where'd Randy go? Double A plus with outlook stable. So we met with Fitch. We're going to meet with Standard & Poor.
They'll give you 3. Okay, seeing no other correspondence, we are adjourned to the next meeting on December 3rd, Wednesday, at usually 6 o'clock. Good night.